Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. On today's show, we're going to find out how corporations are using private companies to spy on citizen activists. We'll also be taking a look at J.P. Morgan's fraud settlement, and we'll tell you how taxpayers are going to be the ones paying for most of that fine. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is trying to weaken the law that helps prevent corporate bribery. Why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is lining up with criminals, we'll talk about it. But right now, you've just stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The NSA isn't the only group that's spying on U.S. citizens. Corporate America has been doing it for decades. Joining me now to talk about that is David Pakman, host of the David Pakman Show. David, one thing that's very clear is that activists, whistleblowers, they're not safe where it comes to corporate espionage these days. It's something we don't think about much, but this topic is becoming more and more important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very important because it's kind of happening on two fronts. Number one is we saw, like around Occupy and the bank protests, etc., that there was surveillance going on there, there was corporate spying going on there. But also we're seeing that it's almost like the NSA is too busy with the bulk surveillance of individuals to even really pay attention to some of the big corporations are doing, and that's basically giving big corporations it's a wide open playing field, rarely any serious repercussions for going beyond the letter of the law when it comes to spying on customers, potential customers, activists that might be agitating against your organization, etc.
Well, one thing we know, most people that know history, of course, remember the Pinkerton efforts to bust unions. The level of violence was just as militant as you might expect to see in some Third World War area. But what's happening now is we're seeing that these corporations, major corporations, and I mean the list is amazing, everything from Shell to McDonald's, Burger King, Chevron, Coca-Cola, Kraft, of course, Walmart, Monsanto, they're actually putting together their own espionage staff. They're not even, they have no shame about the idea at all. They're not embarrassed about it. They're hiring people to do this. How do they go about doing it?
Yeah, a lot of times they live on the fringes of what's legal and what isn't legal. Walmart, you mentioned, is a really, really good example where when Walmart headquarters catches wind that there might be the idea or some inkling of trying to unionize within an individual Walmart store, they will dispatch, it's almost like an emergency response team that goes out there at a cost that some estimate to be $30,000 a day or more, and they will start hanging out in the break rooms. They will actually follow employees around and see if outside of the Walmart location they're talking about unionization. This is not only a surveillance tactic, it's also an intimidation one. It's very organized.
One thing they're doing, David, and we actually saw it with the last Walmart kinds of where you had protests that were very meaningful, very effective protests. They would actually, you'd have a corporation like Walmart that will actually get local law enforcement involved in doing their job. And one thing they do is they simply meet with, it's a good old boy, hey Bubba kind of setting where they go and they meet with Bubba and they say, Bubba, how would you like to come to work with Walmart after this is all over? And Bubba, who is maybe close to retirement or simply wants a higher paying job, wants to leave the police force, wants to leave the sheriff, actually does the bidding of the corporations by beating protesters. I mean, we've seen that time and time again in the last few years, haven't we?
That's exactly right. And the problem with that is that from an outside point of view, as a journalist or just as an individual consumer of news, when you see that there are actual law enforcement authorities involved, it makes you, while you may still not like that it's happening, you stop really questioning, unless you're really a critical thinker, you stop really questioning the legality and the ethics of it, because you see the police officers, you see the badges. Sometimes these are former or undercovers or off duties, but oftentimes, in fact, look at what happened around Black Friday, where law enforcement was basically partnering with a lot of these huge corporations to provide security and crowd control, and it goes way further. It kind of turns off people's activism drive when they say, well, law enforcement is involved, whatever's going on must be legal.
David, there are very specific instances where we've seen this occurring, whether it's Greenpeace, whether it's nursing home activists. We've seen this happen again and again with what we call D-lines. It's a process called D-lines. Describe basically how the process of espionage works.
Yeah, so D lines. You'll have D lines staff and then contractors doing these operations where they will maybe get involved with some ancillary service for an organization. It could be trash and recycling. It could be shredding. Shredding is actually a really big one that should be a red flag for a lot of people because you really are getting access. It's kind of like going to try to steal your neighbor's credit card. It's essentially the same thing that's happening at the big corporate level to obtain so much information. And often I think about it here, I'll shred old checks, I'll shred communications, all sorts of stuff, but then I have to think of who's getting rid of that stuff. Is that really going away, or does someone have access to that material?
Of course, they're seeing instances now where corporations that say they're shredding really are simply taking the information and selling it to maybe a competitor or that type. They've 2 or 3 instances of that just in the recent past. Well, listen, what happens with when they actually go as far as doing plants? They actually put people within the organization. Give us some examples of how corporate espionage works in that regard.
There's a bunch that have been sent around. There's one story that sticks in my mind because I've covered it extensively, and I first heard about this in Outside magazine. It's like an outdoor sports magazine, and it actually went through how there was a so-called eco-terrorist organization that was under suspicion, and a couple of corporations, in conjunction with the FBI, which is what you talked about, working together with law enforcement, actually found an attractive woman to try to show up at some of the rallies and kind of ingratiate herself in the group, undercover FBI informant, and actually ended up herself proposing that an actual violent act be committed by this group. Now, bear in mind, this group had never committed any violent acts in the past. They were pacifist activists simply trying to get the word out there about environmentalism. Subsequently, this actually led to the arrest and conviction of some of these so-called eco-terrorists, and the more the investigation went further, we learned that these guys were never going to do anything violent. It was the corporate spying and FBI informant who was planted there, fed them the ideas to actually carry out violence, and provided them the means to do it. Individuals who otherwise would have been, posting to social media and holding signs at rallies. It's all these standard tactics that often are kind of operating on the fringes of the law, and particularly with these sources that don't have to be named. There's a lot of
Well, what's happening,
there.
example of what you're talking about, the BP case, where BP hired a PR firm called Ogilvy, and they planted what they call trolls. Ogilvy and BP planted trolls all over the internet to attack critics, and they would disguise their names. They disguise actually where they were originating, and they would come out with just every day trying to discredit the critic of BP. But there's
interestingly enough, Pap, that's actually a technique that even Fox News now has been found to do. They will employ this. People around the internet will just sit there and sometimes on dial-up connections to mask their origin and simply rebut critics of Fox News around the internet.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, especially the Mary McFate case. I remember you reported on this early on when it developed. Mary McFate was actually planted in a gun control, a completely peaceful activist organization where Mary McFate was planted in there simply to find out everything she could. This is the type of conduct that we can expect to see more and more. What was McFate actually able to find out?
I'm trying to remember. I believe that she found out that there really wasn't going to be anything that damaging happening, that it seemed to be just kind of like an activist group that was really nonviolent.
That's right, but they placed her on the board, as I think you pointed out in one of your reports. They actually where she was there listening to the agendas of the organization. She would go to meetings and take the license plate numbers of everybody that attended. She would describe the advocates that were there. She would give as much personal information about those advocates as she could, and then the people that hired her to do that would use it all to discredit this organization and anybody actually who was related to that organization. It is a chilling effect for democracy, isn't it, David?
It is, and it's funny, I'm actually working my way through Mad Men, the series following advertising agents based in the 60s, and it's interesting because at the beginning of the series they really do advertising, and then later on they start to figure out there's this thing called public relations we can kind of involve ourselves in. We can plant people at a supermarket to fight over our customers' hams, to make it seem like there's tons of demand. The next thing, the logical follow from advertising becoming public relations is these planted fake stories, the surveillance, the online trolling, the manufacturing opinion. This is the logical extension of the Mad Men PR era.
David Pakman, I always tell everybody I am so glad you are out there. Great report as usual.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll explain how wealth hoarding is forcing more and more people into prison. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire. Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power and programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. The amount of wealth that Wall Street controls is staggering, and the fact that they aren't spending this money to help the economy is forcing many more Americans to resort to crime. That's what the economists are telling us. Joining me now to explain the Wall Street connections to mass incarceration is attorney Michael Burg. Mike, Les Leopold did an incredibly important article talking about Wall Street's incarceration nation. And the parallel he drew is that in nations where poverty increases, incarceration also increases. So that's what he described happening in the United States. What is your take on this topic that's coming up more and more about how prisons are filling up as poverty in America increases?
Well, what's amazing in the United States, probably one of the most developed nations in the world, we have between people on parole and in prison, it's over 8 million people. And Leopold in his article really goes through what the genesis of that is and why we continue to put people into prison. And it's not really what you really think, what you may think logically is the cause, but it's really coming right down to Wall Street.
In other words, what Les Leopold did, and a couple of other economists, Nobel Prize economists, by the way, they charted the increase in incarceration, and they said when Wall Street is having these great years in doing the thuggish, corrupt things that they're doing, certain parts of our culture are being affected. How did they describe those? I think they broke it down in about 3 parts.
Right.
How did they describe that?
Well, I think you start out with, first of all, what happens is Wall Street goes in and buys these companies and then tears them apart. We see that in what used to be the Steel Belt. They don't exist anymore. They're in the Rust Belt. And so what happens right there is you begin to have decay, you have blight, you have unemployment. So that's really the first process as they go in.
Well, Mike, what happens? They go in. You're saying they're corporate raiders, is what they are.
Right,
they are
exactly.
Mitt Romney types. They're Bain Capital types. They go in. They take a corporation. They implode it and send all the jobs overseas. So what does that do to the community?
Right. They have no jobs. The only jobs that are available are maybe working at a McDonald's or a fast food restaurant in which they can't make a living. They can't live on it. So you have this blighted community. And then the second thing that happens is now you have, which is kind of, is reverse psychology, is then they come back in and they redevelop it. And they may redevelop the city, but they redevelop it in a way in which they don't create jobs. It's going on in Detroit right now.
Yeah, they have the coffee.
Toledo.
They have the Starbucks latte group move in. The
Exactly.
upper yuppies or types move into these blighted communities, rebuild the blighted community, and those people move out, and it takes on a completely different feature. What happens with debt? What do we see happening with debt? Les Leopold talked about that a little bit, and I thought it was interesting. Other economists have talked about it as well.
Listen, Wall Street sells debt. They sell it in many different ways. The major banks through credit cards, through loans, through mortgages. So they sell what they're selling to the world is debt. And they do that in many different ways. They may do it through sales of bonds. They may do it through that we see on the CDOs. Those are debt obligations in which they then went ahead and cloned them into trillions of dollars, making money for Wall Street, but not making money for the society. And so as you've seen, our society and our people are deeper in debt, and the country's deeper in debt. Wall Street's there to capitalize on that.
Interestingly enough, when people are out of jobs, they rely more on debt. They use the credit card more. They do things that increases poverty. You don't see it up front, but you see it 3 years down the road after they start getting into that cycle of debt. Well, the most obvious thing I think that economists are talking about is what happened to the housing market. What happened when that bubble burst from an economic standpoint?
Well, what happened after there is first of all, who gained out of that? People don't realize Wall Street gained. The way they gained out of that is, number one, they got bailed out by the government. They were the ones who took trillions of dollars and got that in order to fortify them. But the people who were at the bottom, the people who lost their homes, the people who bought these CDOs, they ended up losing everything. And ultimately, they're unable to come back, and we're starting it all over again right now, where Wall Street is creating these securitized products all over again because our Congress and our President and the Senate have not done anything to stop it. It's going to happen over and over. And when we have more debt, Mike, what happens is people can't make a living in the real market, in the Starbucks, in the McDonald's, in the Burger King, and so they go in the black market, which is the criminal part of it. Now, all of a sudden, they're trying to make money in the black or gray market, and they end up in jail. Not the Wall Street thieves in jail, but the poor people who have been displaced.
Yeah, these economists describe it, this is almost a repeat of Prohibition, where you had the haves of society that owned everything and the have-nots that were struggling for whatever was left out there. The middle class during that period of time, just post-30s, there was no middle class. There was a division that was so severe that we're seeing exactly the same thing play out. They went back, and when you look back what was happening during that era, you had incarceration climbing just like a rocket, the same way we see in South America, where you have this huge disparity of income, where the top 1% own everything, and then 99% are struggling for everything. That struggle ends up ending in incarceration. I think what's interesting is when you see the chart on this, whether it's here, Europe, Asia, South America, you put the two together and they climb together. And when you put the two together on a great economy where there is a division of assets, they drop together. I think it's a pretty compelling argument. But Mike, what is the real stinger here when you take a look at this incarceration?
What's crazy about it is that there's actually a benefit to Wall Street and big corporations who are now privatizing jails. They're getting paid to keep these people in jail. So in the end, it's Wall Street. They ruined it. They ruined it again. They ruined it again, and they're making money on all aspects, including incarceration. It's horrible.
Great days for Wall Street, not so good for the rest of us.
That's right.
Mike, thanks for joining us, okay?
Thanks, Mike.
The FDA recently proposed a new regulation that could help save millions of lives by requiring generic drugs to do the impossible. That is, to be honest with Americans about how dangerous their product really is. I have Linda Lipsen from the AAJ with me to tell us about it. Linda, the generic drug companies still are we don't have control over what they're doing. We can't sue them when they kill people. We don't have any input really where it comes to what they tell people about the dangers of their product. The U.S. Supreme Court has given them this right basically to make a product knowing that it has potential to kill an individual and then sell it anyway. Is the FDA ever going to respond and do what they're supposed to do as a regulatory agency?
Actually, the FDA has launched what they call a rulemaking to change what the Supreme Court did in this decision in 2011. So I'm actually guardedly optimistic that the FDA is going to get this right and protect consumers from very harmful and defective and unreasonably dangerous generic drugs.
The FDA was told when they came up with this ridiculous, absurd kind of language that the generic drug maker may not change a warning, may not change a label, even if they know that it's wrong, even if they know that the drug that they're selling has the propensity to kill people. FDA said, no, you can't change that. And the FDA was told clearly, Linda, don't do that, because if you do that, the generic drug maker is going to say we have immunity because the FDA told us what to do. Now there's been a shift, I take it. Is that right?
Well, really, what started the ball rolling was in 2011, the Supreme Court said we can't fix this unless the FDA fixes it or Congress fixes it. So finally, the FDA has, in response to a citizen's petition that was written by Public Citizen, FDA is coming aboard the bandwagon and really understands that when you have 80% of the marketplace consuming generic drugs, you must make sure that they're safe. And if no one is accountable, no one is safe. So what's going on right now at the FDA is they've enunciated a series of rules that will require the companies to have to update their labels when they find that their products have caused injuries or death. And this will really help protect the public.
I think what's important here, first of all, this has not been done voluntarily. The generic industry is fighting back. They're saying, gee whiz, if you make us do that, costs are going to go up. If you make us do that, it's going to be confusing. If you make us do that, we're too damn stupid to be able to comply, basically, is their argument. And so, but what the reason this occurred, and I think this is so important, this didn't happen by politicians doing what they were supposed to do. This happened because you had public citizens organizations, activists that said, you know what, we have 3 members of our community that died from a generic drug. The family, the widow was left without income, the children were left without income, and now we're told that we can't sue the generic company to even be paid for the loss of our father or of our husband. And so, but it was activists that did this, not politicians, because I remember telling politician after politician, don't sit there and not take action. Where do you think the real movement came from? That's the way I saw it.
I think it was a combination. I mean, there were senators on Capitol Hill that were outraged about this situation, and House members that wrote into the FDA to say, fix this problem. There were many individuals in the Senate and the House that introduced legislation that would have fixed this problem. So, and then the FDA, there were folks within the FDA that wanted to fix this problem. And I think that, I mean, you know this extremely well, that we don't know about the dangers necessarily when the marketing has happened for the drug or the device. What we find out about the dangers when the product is being consumed by thousands of people. And so what you want to do, you don't want to hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil approach. You want to have all of the information available to the public. And the previous policy was really designed to protect generic drug manufacturers, but the way to protect generic drug manufacturers and the public is to have them produce the safest product possible so that the public feels that they're buying a good product.
Now here's the problem. The manufacturer, Boehringer Ingelheim, makes the product called Pradaxa. We find out that the clinical data that they've used is wholly insufficient. It's basically almost phonied up, if you really want to describe it. Now, it's sold in the United States. We start seeing people dying by the hundreds from this product where they're bleeding to death. And now, when a generic takes that over, they are put on notice that this drug will make a person bleed to death, but the generic company sells it anyway, simply for profit, because they don't pay attention to the fact that it's killing people.
Yes, and then they say that they can't change their label because of what the Supreme Court said, which we think is ridiculous and unfair to the public. So, you know, look, it's taken too long to fix this, but they are fixing it. And I think that this situation with generic drugs is going to be a whole lot better for the public. The public is going to be a lot safer, probably as early as this summer when the rules are adopted.
Let's hope so, because right now it is just a crazy frontier out there where generic drug manufacturers are making billions of dollars and Americans are taking all the risk. Linda Lipsen, thank you for being out there with the AAJ. People don't understand, but for the AAJ, a lot of these cases would never even be talked about. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.
When we come back, we'll find out why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce thinks that anti-corruption laws are a bad idea. Really? I'm Mike Papantonio, and we'll be right back with more Ring of Fire. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has launched an attack on a law that punishes companies who commit bribery. To find out why the Chamber thinks anti-corruption laws are a bad idea, let's go to attorney Tim O'Brien. Tim, criminals don't like being caught, do they? And now we see the U.S. Chamber of Commerce trying to come up with changes in a law that is supposed to catch corporate criminals, international corporate criminals, from engaging in corruption. That's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asking for that. What's your reaction to this story that's emerging right now?
It is incredible, Pap, and they have been doing this for 35 years. When this law, the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, was passed back in 1977, it passed the Senate unanimously. And the voice in the wilderness was the Chamber of Commerce saying, hey, all of this is already taken care of. We don't really need this law. And so now they're bringing up this 35-year-old argument, thinking they have friendlier people in Congress who will do and undo what has been so successful for the U.S. government, over $30 billion in fines, regulating foreign practices of our companies.
Well, let's talk about what it is. First of all, it's very, very common sense. What you have here is you have laws that were placed, that were created in the United States to level the playing field for U.S. corporations with foreign corporations, because what we were seeing is you would have a multi-conglomerate, huge multinational corporation going to places like China or South America, India, various places around the world, and bribing officials to get their business put into that particular venue. Now, mom and pop, who wants the same business, mom and pop does it legally, they do it by the books, they don't bribe people. So this was intended to solve some of that, right? But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce could not give a damn less about mom and pop corporations, do they?
No, and they don't care at all. And what they're trying to do is have Congress pass a get out of jail free card. And there's a long history. They have been lobbying Congress, and then Congress went to the SEC and the Department of Justice to say, hey, what can you do to help out these confused companies? So last year, in November of last year, the DOJ and the SEC put together a 130-page Cliff's Notes for these companies saying, this is how you stay out of jail. This is what, if you don't know what corrupt is, look here, we'll tell you what corrupt is. If you don't know what a foreign official is, look under the definition of foreign official. Here's your Cliff Notes, multi-billion-dollar companies. And that wasn't enough. They want
now,
Congress.
Hey, Tim, what's so remarkable? Now, this is what the viewers need to understand. You had corporations like Dow Chemical and Pfizer and BP and the biggest corporations in the world saying, "Oh, gee whiz, we don't know what a bribe is. How can we possibly be held responsible for bribing a public official because we don't know what it is?" Now, understand, these are companies with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lawyers working for them, and the response was, and this is what, honestly, with a straight face, this is what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is arguing. How can we expect these poor people to understand what a bribe or what corruption is? Isn't that basically it? Isn't that what we're hearing?
That's exactly what it is. And when you look at what the Chamber is trying to do, what they are essentially saying is, we're such a large setup, a company, we may have anti-bribery policies, and how are we to know what all our people are doing? If we don't know, the company doesn't know, then we shouldn't be prosecuted. Well, consider the case of GlaxoSmithKline in China, where the government, now the U.S. government is investigating over $489 million in payments routed through the Lingjing travel agency to grease foreign officials. Now, I've been in the files of these pharmaceutical companies, and I've seen how tightly they control travel expenses, how tightly they control what kind of money you can spend on an employee's cake. And if you're telling me a company doesn't know where $489 million has gone in the People's Republic of China, well, boy, I've just woken up on the wrong side of the turnip truck, because it's just not true. It's just not true. It's almost laughable when you look at their wish list, when you look at their 5-point wish list, what the Chamber of Commerce wants to do.
Tim, there are many parts to the problem here. Obviously, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is arguing that no, they don't want to level the playing field for mom and pop corporations. They would rather have their biggest donors, as you understand, I think you've done a report on this before, 19 major international conglomerate corporations that are centered in the United States are their biggest donors to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So this is all about making sure that those best donors get away with committing crime, and mom and pop doesn't even get to compete. Now, that's the first part of the problem. You just handled an incredibly important case, Fosamax, and so what we've seen is not with Fosamax so much, but with so many other pharmaceuticals, we've seen a situation to where the clinical data in the United States is affected by being phonied up based on studies that are done in foreign countries where a corporation might grease the skids, commit bribery in the foreign country to commit clinical data, to create clinical data that we then use in the United States, and we find out it's completely fraudulent.
It's a very, very real problem, and there's two parts to that issue. Number one is if it's a clinical trial that is not a true clinical trial, it's one of the early clinical trials, the data, if they're foreign, don't even have to be reported to the FDA when the new drug application is filed. That's number one. But what they do is, once they start figuring out what they need the data to be, you're exactly right. They use government hospitals overseas and they get access to unblinding the data so that they can miscategorize or categorize how they wish the favorable data into the supposed treatment group and put all the bad data, that is the things that you don't want to happen, in the placebo group. And because there's not the tighter regulatory oversight as if this were taking place at the Mayo Clinic in the United States, this money has a very real impact on United States lives.
They bribe public officials. I mean, we've seen them bribing health officials. I mean, the regulatory health officials in a dozen countries in various pharmaceutical cases, where they give the person that's the equivalent of the FDA money to be able to do these things that end up phoning up data that we use in the United States, and because of that, dangerous drugs are put on the market. That's the first part of it. But then the second part of it is you have them, we actually have cases where governments have wanted, foreign governments have wanted to take a product off the market because they figured that the product was so dangerous. But then the company then comes in, pays off that official that wanted to take it off the market, and it stays on the market there, therefore it stays on the market in the United States. Has all kinds of tentacles here, doesn't it?
It sure does, and one of the most extreme examples I saw of this, and you and I were involved in this litigation years and years ago, was the phenylpropanolamine litigation. You recall the Yale group of scientists discovered that there was a very strong link between this cough-cold medication and hemorrhagic stroke. Well, there was an effort, a concerted effort by the pharmaceutical companies that made these cough-cold medicines to find a study to defeat the big Yale study, and they did it where? In Korea, in South Korea. And at first blush, it came out, oh, there's not a problem at all. Well, the South Korean government looked further into it, found these foreign payments, recalculated the study, and found that, yes, just like the Yale study found, there's a very strong link. And guess what? The entire top level of the Korean FDA was sacked. But it was because of the money, the U.S. money flowing into Seoul, that influenced the outcome, and that country had PPA on the market longer than any other country in the world because of U.S. money flowing in, attempting to shape the science.
And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying, you know what, that's the way we ought to be able to do business, that our corporations, that, by the way, I want to say this again and again, they are not mom and pop. They're not the hardware store down the road. They're Dow Chemical, they're Exxon, they're BP, they're Pfizer, they're Merck. They're the biggest corporations in the world where U.S. Chamber of Commerce is getting all their money. So now the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying to these corporations, we will be your mouthpiece for allowing you to continue to be corrupt. I don't know how else you could possibly describe this conduct. I mean, isn't that, when you distill everything, isn't that what's happening here?
It's exactly what's happening, and when you look at the 5-part wish list of the Chamber of Commerce, the 5-part wish list, the immediate human reaction anyone has reading that wish list is, don't bribe foreign officials. That's how you stay out of jail. It's simple. It's simple. But what they want to do, Pap, is they want to structure it so that parent companies are not responsible for what their subsidiary companies do. So the subsidiary companies can go and grease the officials in China or in Germany or wherever. All the money kicks up to the mama ship, and it's only the subsidiary company that's prosecuted, and you've seen this in BP.
And they disguise it through the subsidiary company. Although Pfizer, for example, may have a subsidiary company that is nothing more than an extension of Pfizer, Pfizer insulates themselves from these laws, right?
Correct, and as it stands right now, Pfizer would be held responsible. What the chamber wants to do is only, Pfizer Micro LLC, some little desk in New York City that's a subsidiary, quote, would be prosecuted, where Pfizer would walk free and clear, and Pfizer the little subsidiary corporation would have the conviction, would have the fine, and maybe they have the money, maybe they don't, but it would not impute to the mothership like it currently stands.
Can you imagine a mom and pop business going over to South Korea and bribing public officials to lie about a medication that was going to kill people and not being prosecuted? Nobody is ever prosecuted. The cases, people have any doubts about, go look at the Eli Lilly case, go look at the Pfizer case, go look at the Siemens AG case, look at Johnson & Johnson, case after case where the level of corruption is nothing short of organized crime. And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying, you know what? We want organized crime because we make more money doing that. Tim O'Brien, thank you very much for joining me. This is an important story. It needs a lot more attention.
It was my pleasure, Pat.
Just ahead, we'll find out why law schools are more concerned about making money than they are educating young attorneys. I'm Mike Papantonio, and you're watching Ring of Fire. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power and programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Law schools in America have lost their way. They're now more concerned with making money than they are with training high-quality, honest trial lawyers. Joining me now to tell us how this affects the American justice system is attorney Howard Nations. Howard, law schools are doing very well, but law students these days are not doing all that well. Talk about what the problem is.
Well, the American Bar Association has a committee that does a study every year, and they study three things. One, law school enrollment. Two, the cost of attendance. And three, the employment of law school grads. Now, law schools themselves are doing great. Tuition over the last 5 years has gone from $34,298 to $40,634 on average. That outpaces inflation by $3,000 over the last 5 years. Enrollment peaked in 2010 at 52,488, but it's still holding very steady at very high levels. The bleak part comes in the employment. The white shoe firms are cutting back. Instead of hiring large numbers, they're cutting back on the number
now, when
of
you say white shoe firms, you're talking about the silk stocking corporate types that, you know,
exactly.
They bill these young lawyers like, they treat them like cattle, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah, they make them bill 2,000 hours a year, and they bill their time at, they pay them a pittance of what they bill their time for. The big problem with the employment, aside from the fact that it's not there, is that the student debt for many people has reached an astronomical $200,000. So that's just that combination is just deadly.
Isn't one problem that we're seeing in the law school? First of all, I know you interview young lawyers just like I do. Lately, I have been more and more disappointed on their depth of knowledge. They can talk about what they call the law and economics, which it's an aberration. It's ridiculous to the point that a law student used to think about societal changes, cultural changes, justice, fairness, taking care of the little guy. Now that's been turned on its head by Judge Posner, hasn't it?
Yes, it actually has. I know when we started the law school, we were thinking in terms of Brown versus Board of Education and the social impact of Baker versus Carr reapportioning 37 legislatures to get equal representation and fairness and justice to all citizens. Now it's all about law and economics. This is an offshoot of the Chicago School of Economics. The concept is that the utility of legal rules should be judged by should be analyzed and judged by their ability to promote economically efficient outcomes. So it's all about economics as opposed to justice, equity, or just basic fairness.
Well, Howard, what you're seeing is the same thing I am. As these kids are coming out of law school, they're going to the big corporation kind of law firms where they're paid hardly anything for billable hours. And the idea that they're taught with this new concept of law school, what I call the Posner concept, the law and economics concept, is that greed is good, and that their role as a lawyer should be to do everything they can to make sure that that corporation they work for makes as much money as possible, regardless of the harm that they do. There's no fairness, there's no justice, there's no looking out for the little guy anymore. Most of these kids coming out of law school right now, they want to go to the corporate firm, they want to play golf, they want to be part of the country club, they want to be accepted by the Rotary Club right there in town. Then they could not give a damn less about taking care of people the same way that young lawyers used to care about when they'd come out of law school. Now, that's a broad generalization, but I'm just telling you that's what I'm personally seeing, and that's what many lawyers that work around me have to say about what they're seeing as well.
Well, where that comes from, Mike, is Judge Richard Posner, who, when he was a law professor back in 1970, he wrote an article called Economic Analysis of Law, in which he basically launched an attack on the common law courses of contracts and property and torts. And the idea that they should be, the purpose of them should be to achieve equity and justice. What he said was that it's the promotion of economic efficiency is what law should be all about. And he, for example, in a contract case, the idea is to maximize the financial reward between the parties. That's what he wrote. You shouldn't look at it in terms of who breached the contract, how much were the damages, who owes who what. You should maximize financial reward between the parties. So if you have a $100 million dispute, his idea was, well, let's keep it fair. Let's just give $50 million to each party. That's why we don't try cases to judges. Judges have a tendency to split the baby, while juries will try to render justice and be fair.
Well, now Howard, think about what Posner is saying. Posner is saying, we don't care which is the more corrupt corporation. We don't care what the hell they've done. We don't care who they've trampled on, what they've done to lie, cheat, or steal. As long as the economics of it comes out okay, we don't really care about social justice issues. We care more about the greed factor, that greed is good as the corporation must make more money.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But you know, the effect of that is Judge Posner, he's a judge because he's now in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Posner is now the most frequently cited legal thinker in history. That shows you the nature and extent of his power. But the other side of that coin is the conservative side is to teach critical legal studies. You learn the law, you learn the skills, you learn to apply the law, with the concept being that you try to achieve justice and fairness and equality. But in the first year of law school now, you find out that those are naive concepts, that the real goal is a smooth running market. And so the law schools today denigrate the workaday practice. They glorify oiling the machine. In 1982, Professor Duncan Kennedy came out with a polemic against this system, and he recognized and attacked Posner's position on law econ. What he said was, we're now training ideologically for service in the corporate welfare state. That's
and
how
you know
we're
what
raising our kids.
And Howard, the bad news is you and I are seeing it firsthand in the courtroom when we see some of these kids in the way they view the world. Howard Nations, thank you for joining me, okay?
My pleasure, Mike.
The Department of Justice thinks that their recent fraud settlement with J.P. Morgan proves that they're finally getting serious about cracking down on Wall Street crime. But the settlement isn't worth celebrating. I have attorney James Kauffman with me now to tell us why. You know, James, people heard about a $13 billion agreement with the Department of Justice and J.P. Morgan where they had to pay $13 billion, as if that really means anything to J.P. Morgan. Put in terms of exactly how ridiculous it is to believe that means anything.
Well, first, Pap, it's J.P. Morgan makes probably $50 billion off of the wrongdoing that they did in relation to all these mortgage-backed securities that they sold. But on top of that, this is a no-admit settlement. That means that J.P. Morgan isn't admitting to anything. They're not saying that we did anything wrong. Their CFO, Marianne Lake, said, we did not admit or acknowledge any misrepresentation of facts. They are walking away from this settlement with absolute no culpability whatsoever. No one's going to jail. No one's even going to be charged at the end of the day. It's an out-of-court settlement.
There was not one person in management from bottom up that was it was even investigated or charged. The interesting thing to me, James, is J.P. Morgan wanted total immunity. They wanted to say, we want complete, utter immunity in this, and they also wanted to seal the files to where nobody would see what their conduct was. And the only thing that changed that were people like you who pushed back. Tell us that. Tell us that story.
That's right. People like me that bring claims against these Wall Street banks, we bring class actions, we bring individual actions against them to hold them accountable. And what the banks are interested in doing is just getting out their checkbook, which they have a very big bank account, and just writing a check and saying, but you know, I'm not going to admit anything's wrong. I don't want any DOJ findings out there. I don't want any record, and I want to be immune from criminal sanctions against me.
But we'll throw a kid in prison for 2 years if he tries to sell 3 ounces of pot.
Yes.
But these characters, as you pointed out, in now this is just one of the J.P. Morgan scams.
That's right.
Isn't it? I mean,
that's right.
There's about a scam every year, or now it's about every 6 months. J.P. Morgan is paying the government, $4 million, $10 million, $13 billion. So the point being, nobody goes to jail and it's business as usual for this corporation. And I think what people don't understand is consumers and taxpayers actually end up paying the $13 billion, don't they? Tell us how that works.
Yeah, that's right. The consumers and the taxpayers wind up paying the money because if you look at this, what are they in trouble for? Bailing out, actually they've been bailed out already. They've received all of the TARP and other funds when we had the too big to fail. Jamie Dimon has actually gone on record as saying that his company makes more money in economic downturns. Well, of course they did, because they received all kinds of bailout money. And here, it's about Bear Stearns that they bought that the government subsidized. The government subsidized their buying of Bear Stearns, buying all of this subprime debt and selling it out, selling this crap out to the public investors. The taxpayers at the end of the day will pay this $13 billion. It won't be paid by J.P. Morgan. It's not even, the numbers aren't even going to come out that because they're going to get a tax credit for the largest portion of this. Only $2 billion of this comes out from profits. The other 11.
I know you saw Jed Rakoff is a U.S. district judge, probably one of the most conservative, politically politically, socially, legally conservative judges in the Southern District of New York.
And
he came out and said, what the Justice Department has done here is they have given the stamp of approval for lawlessness, for corruption. Right. They've said, look, you can pay your way out of anything. Nobody goes to prison. Nobody has to worry about anything. And when you have Judge Rakoff saying that this is a travesty, everybody better be concerned about what this Justice Department just agreed to with J.P. Morgan, shouldn't they?
Yes, absolutely. And Judge Rakoff is the one that he's the famous Southern District of New York judge who went to the SEC with the settlement with Goldman Sachs and said, quote, "I am not here to rubber stamp your deals." Judge Rakoff is one of our better judges on this that wants the company, Wall Street, to say, look, if you're not going to just write a check, you're going to admit some fault.
But let's be clear about Rakoff. Rakoff is no, bleeding heart liberal. Rakoff comes from the industry, well respected by. He is well respected by both sides, whether it's Wall Street or the other or plaintiffs' lawyers. And he comes out and says that this is serious. This is a serious problem. Now Eric Holder, on the other hand, says, you know what? Gee whiz. We're not through looking at this. Really, they've been looking at it for how many years now, and they've done nothing about it.
Yeah, you go back to the subprime crisis. That's 2009. They've been looking at this from at least 2010. 3 years, this is really the end of it. They say that, oh yeah, we'll keep going, but this is sending a clear message. There's no fault being admitted. This isn't even an in-court settlement. Pat, this is an out-of-court settlement that doesn't have any judicial approval whatsoever. This is out of court. There's no real claims that are being filed here. It's a complete out-of-court settlement, and this is done.
And James, they do it so the people who lost all the money, mom and pop that lost their homes, mom and pop that lost everything, that it makes it more difficult for them to use the same material that the Department of Justice used against the company in private cases. Isn't that part of the reason J.P. Morgan wanted that to unfold like this?
Absolutely. You have millions of Americans in foreclosure proceedings that have either lost their home and there could be a wrongful foreclosure claim, or they are currently in that proceeding. J.P. Morgan doesn't want them to have the benefit of the government, all of the facts that they've developed over 3 years, all of the interviews, all of the testimony. They don't want any of that because they don't want the individual investors to have any recourse against them. They want to write the one check
this
and
department,
that's it.
The end of the story is this Department of Justice simply puts its stamp of approval on criminal activity by the U.S. banking industry. James, thanks for joining me, okay? Hopefully you'll go after them as aggressively as you have in the past.
I'm looking forward to doing it, Pat.
Thanks a lot. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.